Story 1. My parents told my brother to take my house because I don't have a family. I'm a single man in my early 30s. I've got a brother who's 29, and he's already got 4 kids. Now, he had his first at 22, and the second followed a year later. Then the third 2 years after that, and the fourth is the most recently born a couple of months ago. His wife, my sister-in-law, and I do not get along, as she always likes to try and get a rise out of me by acting superior, then turns into an extreme self-victimizing drama queen if I retaliate against her in any way. She can cry in an instant and can put on an extremely convincing show to get sympathy from just about anyone. My parents and brother absolutely adore her, even though they know exactly how she really is, and just don't care. She's very good-looking, I'll give her that, but she's so awful that I could never be attracted to her. She also refuses to get any sort of job, even though she has a college degree, and my mother willingly helps with the kids all day, so their finances are entirely dependent on my brother. This also means they can't afford to live anywhere but my parents' house, and privacy is a bit of an issue with all of them under one roof in a 3-bedroom house that was built in the 60s. Growing up, my younger brother was also the obvious favorite. We're 3 years apart in age, but he developed a superiority complex because I was badly punished if I retaliated against his antics in any way. Back then, it was obvious my parents cared for him a lot more because he got the lion's share of everything unless people called them out on it, which did happen a fair bit by other members of the family, which is why my parents packed us all up and moved us about 150 miles away from them, so they generally would only see us on holidays since it was a 3-hour drive. My brother got physically abusive towards me on a number of occasions, flirted relentlessly with my first girlfriend to the point she broke up with me, and laughed at any misfortune I had, and my parents just told me to suck it up whenever I was upset about it. I only got equal treatment when my parents wanted to keep up appearances. I admit it was rather funny to see the looks on their faces whenever they had to treat me equally to my brother on birthdays and Christmas because other people were present. We had relatives who were very nosy and loved gossiping drama, so my parents did their best to hide what was really going on and threatened to take all my stuff away if I didn't keep my mouth shut. If anything, it just made my parents celebrate more when I turned 18 and moved out because it meant they no longer had to provide for me. I wasn't even done with high school yet when I moved out, but couch surfing was far better than living with them. I was in low contact ever since leaving home. They didn't even show up for my high school graduation, but I really didn't care from that point on. I would usually only see my parents and brother on holidays like the rest of the family. The start of the 2020 pandemic was not kind to me. I lost my job and couldn't renew the lease on my condo because my roommate also lost his job, and neither of us could afford the place on unemployment money. It was a rented 2-bedroom condo that I really loved. As the lease was ending, my roommate left early to move back in with relatives, and I had to sell nearly all of my stuff because I was soon going to be homeless if I didn't downsize to an extreme. I really shouldn't have rented a place that was so expensive, but I liked living the high life until that life wasn't kind to me, and I realized I should have been living somewhere far cheaper so I could have saved more money to fall back on. But I had a plan. I own a truck simply for the fact that I've always loved trucks, so I found a $1,000 camper in good shape and put it on my truck just so I could live out of it for a while. It was supposed to be temporary, but I ended up living out of it far longer than I ever thought. I originally was hoping to be able to live out of the camper at my parents' house, where my brother and his family still reside as well, but when I asked my parents to let me stay for a while, they told me they had a full house and didn't want me there. Plus, we hadn't exactly gotten along in the past decade. They said they'd only agree to let me park my camper there if I paid them basically what it would cost to rent an apartment in my area. That was way too much just to park my camper. I was jobless and trying to save as much of my unemployment money as I could till I could find a new job. I may as well have been living in an apartment with that rent price they were asking. My parents called my camper an eyesore and told me to take a hike since we couldn't come to an agreement, and my sister-in-law thought it was absolutely hilarious I had to live in a camper. My brother joined her in pointing out and mocking me while calling me a homeless bum. I parked my truck/camper in a store parking lot to sleep on the first night that I had nowhere else to go. I felt scared out of my mind that someone might try to break in. Suffice to say, I didn't sleep well that night. There was nowhere else I could go, as any other relatives that owned houses were fairly far away, and all my friends were apartment people. I was pretty attached to my area as well, so I didn't want to just leave. I'd also had my mail forwarded to a friend's apartment. It was the only way I could still get my mail anymore. Finding a stable place to park was pretty difficult. I went looking around to try and find a job similar to my old one. It took months of living the nomadic camper life. In that time, I had to deal with a lot. Everything from beggars and drug addicts to people demanding I leave because my camper was an eyesore. At one point, someone who told me to move claimed to be within an HOA. I wasn't even parked on a street with houses, and when I questioned what HOA, they got incredibly belligerent and threatened me. I moved my camper anyway just to avoid the trouble. In order to have a steady supply of electricity, I learned to use a long extension cord to plug in anywhere I could to recharge my camper batteries. This meant sneaking around and plugging it into an outside outlet of a random building while parked on a street. I know that's a crummy thing to do, but I had to keep my batteries charged so my refrigerator would stay cold. I had a small solar power bag for recharging my phone, but I didn't have anything like a generator, and generators are noisy and require fuel anyway, so I did what I had to do. After months of living like that, I finally managed to get a new job. I had to move to the neighboring city to find a job that didn't involve retail. I worked retail while in college and promised myself never again, though I was nearly ready to break that promise. I was still getting unemployment money, but I had no stable place to live while receiving it, and I didn't want to still be jobless when it ran out, plus I was bored out of my mind. I had little else to do but read, watch movies on a small portable DVD player, use my phone or laptop, and keep note of where I could park and what local public bathrooms I could use. I kind of envy that the Japanese have public bathhouses. We could really use stuff like that over here. When I finally landed a new job, I practically lived in the back lot of the building by the warehouse in old employee parking spaces. Literally no one else seemed to bother using them because they were so far in the back that the area was borderline forgotten. My boss/company owner actually liked this arrangement because I was willingly available to take any shift I could get, so long as I had enough sleep. He even let me take the camper off my truck and set it up in one of the spaces so I could drive around without it. Not exactly sure if this was legal, but no one bothered us about it the entire time I lived back there. I didn't have to deal with many trespassers. There were a few, but the security guards escorted them out. I was pretty much on call almost all the time when they needed me and was working virtually every day of the week. My boss let me plug my camper into the building for power and water, and I paid a small amount of rent by working for free on Sundays when no one else was in the office but the janitor and security guard. Beyond that, I usually had to shower at a friend's apartment or at my local gym, as the camper didn't have a shower in it and only a portable toilet, and I didn't want to fill it because emptying it is a nasty chore, so I used other bathrooms as often as I could. I had a key to the warehouse and could go in to use the bathroom there at any hour. I was even on a first-name basis with the night security guard. He's since become one of my closest friends. The camper was easy to heat in the winter with a small electric heater. Summers were not fun though. The camper didn't have AC, so I had to get a used portable air conditioner just to make it bearable. I made a lot of overtime pay and learned some new skills from other employees. Eventually, midway into this year, I landed a better position in the company as a supervisor and started making a better salary than my old job. That's when I decided I wanted a house. The scare I'd gotten from losing my condo made me realize I needed something much more stable for the long term. I looked around for something close to my work and just 2 miles away found a 3-bedroom manufactured home on a small property. But I managed to get it for $10,000 less than the asking price somehow. I used nearly my entire savings for a down payment and got approved for a home loan. I finally didn't have to live in a camper anymore. There was enough space for me to back my truck in behind the house to take the camper off to set it up in the backyard, so I put it there as its own little building, just in case I want to use it again. When I was fully settled in the house, I was dumb enough to brag about it on Facebook. My family saw the post, and that's where this stuff really starts. After a few weeks, my parents and brother, along with his family, came to visit completely unannounced to have a tour of my home. I didn't even give them my address, so how they found out where I live, I still don't know. None of my friends have fessed up, and no prior family members visited me before that, so I wonder if they stalked me at work and followed me home or something. It really wouldn't surprise me. Once I opened the door, they practically all shoved their way in like rambunctious tourists, then just started making themselves at home. They all kept poking around, and my sister-in-law had this creepy smirk that she was repeatedly flashing me, and it was only later that I figured out why, and it made me madder than a bull on steroids that just got stung by a hornet. My parents were constantly talking about how I've got so much extra space now and it's too much for someone like me who has no wife or kids. Sure, not now but maybe someday. And my brother kept remarking about how there was more space than our parents' house and my house was closer to his job. 2 red flags all around. I know. Eventually, my brother, let's call him Dan for the sake of simplicity, said the house was too much for me alone and I should let him move in with his family because his wife was pregnant with kid number 5, and my house was much closer to his job. He pointed out that I already have the camper, so I could just live in that outside while they live in the main house. And I'd like to point out that Dan never once spoke of offering rent, mind you. If he's got a good job, he also started talking about how there would be changes and even curfews and that I couldn't just walk in at any time without prior notice. If it weren't for my brother, I think the person I was talking to had lost their mind, but Dan lost his marbles long ago, thanks to our parents treating him like he was the center of the world. I tried to speak, but he kept talking over me as if I had no say in the matter. There was no way in hell I'd rent my house or parts of my house to him. Other people maybe, just so I can pay the mortgage off more easily, but certainly not him or his nasty wife. I've heard of this exact kind of situation in videos online many times and never once did I think I'd actually live it because I thought it was so ludicrous, but my parents, brother, and sister-in-law do all fit the bill for a bunch of narcissistic, entitled crazies. So I picked up my phone and set it to start recording, then just held on to it. Dan didn't even seem to care or notice that I'd done this and just sat there with his arms waving around while talking about all the reasons why he needed my house. Then went from saying that to acting like it was a done deal and trying to reach out his hand to shake mine. That's when I finally showed my backbone and said, "Hell no." And I said it loud enough that Dan stumbled backward for a second. I'd rarely ever raised my voice to him on that level because I was punished by our parents whenever I did. But this was my house, not theirs. My spine can be as shiny as it was here. I stood up and then told him that my house was not up for grabs and acting like I'd let him move in just because they wanted it won't make it happen. I bought my house for me, and it's not my fault he keeps having more kids and has to keep living with our parents because he can't afford to move out. Dan got as physically close to me as he could without actually touching me and said that I didn't deserve the house and he needed a better place for his family to live. I laughed back in his face and said that was total bull because I worked hard to be able to buy my house. Of course, I deserved it. Dan started yelling that I have no wife or kids and I don't need all the space, so I may as well give it to him. I said I'm not giving him anything, and he never even offered to pay me rent if I let him move in. I'd still be covering the entire mortgage on my own house without even being able to live in my own house. Then Dan told me that he shouldn't have to pay rent because his family comes first. After I kicked my parents, brother, and sister-in-law out for trying to force me to hand over my new house to my brother, I immediately went to my social media and told the story to the whole family. It spread pretty fast, but you won't find it now because it all got deleted some time ago, and I put my own profile on private. I posted about it because I knew that the first thing my family would do when they got home was try to twist the event to make me the villain, and I was exactly right, but I had about an hour to get started before them, and I had video evidence to back up my story about what they'd done. No, I don't plan on showing the video here, so don't ask. Being preemptive worked because I got a fair number of family members on my side right away. My parents, Dan, and sister-in-law must have been all set to write their own post. But it was too late, so they didn't even bother trying to lie much. My parents, Dan, and sister-in-law had a few flying monkeys supporting them, but not much else. Plenty of others knew how entitled they already were, so what happened was something they all quickly understood and accepted. There was one person in particular that called me. I don't know who they were, but they ranted at me that I was a horrible brother and I needed to make way for a real family man. I just ended the call and blocked the number. This didn't repeat. The week went by, and my parents showed up with Dan at my front porch, just like they said they would in their prior ultimatum. They rang my doorbell like crazy and also pounded on the door until I finally answered. I opened it just a crack and they tried to shove their way in again, but I'd installed a couple of latch chains that prevented it and even braced my body against the door for good measure. My father and brother demanded I let them in, but I said I was recording everything on camera and would call the police if they tried to force their way in again. My mother calmed them down and then, in her most sickly sweet tone, asked me if I was ready to let my brother move in. I told her and the rest of them to piss off and never come back. My mother put on the crocodile tears and asked me why I couldn't just do this for Dan because he's my beloved brother. I laughed and then bluntly said I do not love him as a brother because he treated me like crap for years, and they are terrible parents and he is a terrible brother. Then I told them to leave, or I'd be calling the police ASAP. They all left surprisingly easily, apart from my mother's loud crying and the others giving me dirty looks. One could say making them leave was suspiciously easy. I thought the whole mess was over, but I guess I should have taken them more seriously because they had other stupid plans in store. I came home later that week on Friday evening to find a moving truck and my brother's minivan parked in my driveway. It was Dan and his family. They were moving stuff in. He just waved to me with a crap-eating grin when I saw him. I was furious and told him and the rest of his family to stop, but my sister-in-law smugly said to me that, like it or not, they were moving in, and then in the most fake way while tilting her head and puckering her lips, she said that it was okay because my mommy allowed it, and I should always listen to what my mommy tells me. I seethed with rage just hearing those words and looking at her smug idiot face, so I locked myself in my truck to call the cops right away. When they realized what I was doing, my sister-in-law started pounding on my window and yelling at me to stop, and that I couldn't do this to her because she and Dan need the house, and she cried, "Why can't you just do this for Dan?" I responded with, "Shit, Dan, it's my damn house, not his." Then she threatened to key the side of my truck unless I stopped calling the police, all of which the 911 operator heard thanks to the window being slightly open. I told my sister-in-law if she damaged my truck, I'd sue her, and she was smart enough to retreat when the police arrived. Dan and my sister-in-law, along with their kids, had locked themselves in my house. I told the cops what had happened, as well as showed them my new driver's license that had my current address on it. Then, when we went to my front door, I saw that they'd changed the lock, and the old lock was lying on the porch with the center of it drilled out, and the drill they used was lying right next to it with a complete Harbor Freight drill bit set. Could they have been any more stupid, leaving evidence out like that? I pointed out the broken lock and drill, then gave the police a rundown of all the events that happened prior. Well, I guess Dan called our parents over at some point after I arrived home because they showed up while I was talking to the cops. My parents immediately lied and started saying that I'd agreed to rent my house to my brother and his family. I said that was an easily provable lie one way or another, so Dan and my sister-in-law finally came out of my house with some papers in hand. They both looked super smug like they'd somehow outsmarted me. They'd actually drawn up and printed out a fake rental agreement, but my signature was not on it. There was one, but it looked nothing like my handwriting. I don't think any of them have ever actually seen my signature, so that was incredibly stupid on their part. I told my parents and Dan that was stupidly blatant fraud, and if the cops investigated they'd easily figure that out, and I don't think going to jail and court would do them any good. It could even make Dan lose his job, which is his only means of providing for his family. I also said I would get a lawyer and sue for damages if anything of mine was lost, stolen, or broken, and I'd call CPS 2 for good measure. Dan went white and looked really scared when I said all that, but my mother got between us and doubled down about how I should just do this for Dan and live in the damn camper, so they can finally have a family home to themselves. I yelled at her that if she thought it was such a good idea, she could do it for Dan herself and let Dan have her house to himself instead. The cops separated my mother from me, and I stated in a shout about how they drilled out my front door lock to break in. The lease papers were obvious fakes. They badly forged my signature, and I have recorded video of my sister-in-law attacking me. Those are felonies I could shit over their lives with if I wanted, and if they didn't leave, that's exactly what I would do. The only reason I hadn't already was for the sake of Dan's kids, so they have one chance to get the hell out. The moment my parents heard that, I think it finally clicked that they could not force me to do it for Dan. My mother surrendered and said she'd put an end to this. Then she went over to my sister-in-law and spoke with her quietly for a minute while my father spoke to Dan. My sister-in-law instantly started loudly crying and ripping up the fake rental papers into tiny bits and tossing them like confetti, only to have an officer tell them to pick up the bits of paper or he'd cite them for littering. Both of the cops at this point had the "I don't get paid enough for this" look on their faces. Dan had to start telling his kids to load their stuff back into the moving truck. The kids were all crying, and the eldest was sobbing that he wouldn't get his own room now. My sister-in-law and Dan gathered their kids up to try and make one last pathetic attempt to guilt me with a sad family routine, where they all gathered together in a sort of group hug while facing one direction. I swear I think they practiced it beforehand. All of the kids had the same pleading look with quivering mouths. My sister-in-law kept rubbing her pregnant belly and tilting her head to look like a sad puppy, and my brother just made the saddest face he possibly could and said, "Please don't do this, we need to be able to live here." But I didn't falter and told them to keep packing. All the kids and my sister-in-law turned the crying up to 11, and Dan yelled at me, "Are you satisfied with yourself? You've denied us home because you're too selfish to share and help out the family." I ended up laughing like a maniac and retorting that what he was trying to do was taking, not sharing, and no amount of crying would make me let his family move in because he's no brother of mine anymore. He's just an entitled prick who thinks he can take whatever he wants from me like when we were kids. Dan started F-bombing me until the cops told him to cool it or he'd be arrested for disorderly conduct. He sucked in his lips and looked a mix of afraid and supremely pissed off. I asked the cops if they could stick around and supervise until my parents, brother, and sister-in-law had all left, and they said they had no intention of going anywhere until this had been resolved. In fact, in the next few minutes, 2 cops became 4 as more drove in for whatever reason. That gave my parents some extra incentive to get moving. I made Dan give me the keys to the new lock he put on my front door, though I got another lock the next day anyway because I didn't know if he had copies of the keys or not. He was really reluctant to hand them over. Then, instead of handing them to me, he actually threw them down the street and into a storm drain while saying, "Go get them myself." But one of the cops scolded him for that and made him go get them. He had to pull the grate off just to get at them, and he got pretty dirty in the process. When he got the keys back, he just grumbled, then slammed them down into my hand. I then told them all to leave and never come back. My mother said I'd be disowned for this as if that were some kind of threat to me, and I voiced that to them. Then, in an overly sarcastic way, I said something along the lines of, "Oh no, that means I won't get to come to any holidays with you guys where I always get treated like crap by you all anyway because Dan has always been your obvious favorite. You treated me so badly when I was growing up that if Dan ever needs an organ donor, I wouldn't give him anything, so do like you always told me to do when I was mistreated by all of you and suck it up." Final update. My parents told my brother to take my house because I don't have a family. I decided to wait on making an account and posting until after the new year, just in case more stuff happened, and it did. As previous readers know, my sister-in-law was making passive-aggressive posts on social media that were obviously directed at me, especially after she had her 4th baby in November. She was posting the same repetitive nonsense over and over again. She just found semi-clever ways of rewording it, but she pretty much kept regurgitating that she was tired of living with my parents, that there wasn't enough space, she needed her own house, blah blah blah. I know I sound dismissive, but live through what I have with these people, and you'd be ready to sarcastically play tiny violins in front of them too. They're just that bad. And since I waited until January to make an account, more happened, just like I thought. I stated before that I'd invited half the family for a Christmas Eve party at my house, and everyone I invited came, even though it was a fairly long drive of around 3 to 4 hours for them. But they wanted to come and show me their support. I was praised by them a lot for how hard I'd worked to get a house on my own, and that they were sorry for everything I went through. I was asked why I didn't just take my camper and drive the 3 hours back to them instead of living pretty much homeless for so long, and I had to sheepishly admit that I was very attached to living around here, and I had my best employment opportunities in this area. My hometown doesn't have a lot of great job opportunities in my field, if any at all, and I wanted to make my own way as much as I could. An answer they overall accepted. We moved on to having a rather nice party, the best I'd been to in years. Some relatives even brought CDs of great Christmas albums, and I have to say the one my uncle brought of Ray Charles was my favorite. He sings Christmas songs like no one else I've heard. It was a grand and happy time. I felt like, for once, I could just forget my past issues and enjoy the moment. But I wouldn't be writing this if it had stayed that way. About 2 hours into the party, you know who showed up? My parents, brother, and sister-in-law popped in, trying to look all smiles. They didn't even knock, just walked right in my front door like they were meant to be there. I shut off the music and told them to leave immediately. They begged to stay and said they brought gifts. One of my uncles stood up and yelled at them before I got another chance to speak, and he said they don't deserve to be in my home or my life after the crap they tried to pull months earlier, and he was backed up by several other relatives. Mind you, this guy is my mother's brother, and he used to love her to pieces until he found out about the stuff that went on between me and my parents. My grandparents, mother's parents, as old as they are, hurriedly got in between us and said to my parents that if they want to make amends with me, it's far too soon, and they've never been more disappointed in them than they were this past year. They'd hidden their favoritism for my brother from prying eyes for a long time, but no one was fooled anymore, and they needed to make a serious effort to try and actually treat me like a son if they ever wanted to be in my life again. Then they turned to Dan and my sister-in-law and said they've seen the repetitive nonsense my sister-in-law keeps posting about how they're tired of it, and to just let it go already. My house will not become their new home. My sister-in-law went back to her old standard of crying and had a pity party about how she should be the one living here and not me. She plopped down in a chair to have a tantrum and say it wasn't fair I got this house to myself when I have no family of my own, and she has 4 kids that need more space, and she just wanted a better place to live in and feel like a real mom. It was petty of me, but I loudly pointed out that she sucks as a mother because she lets my mother do most of the parenting while she sits on her butt all day playing on her phone or going out and spending all of Dan's money, and she has the nerve to complain about it. I even joked that I'm surprised her baby doesn't get drunk from her breast milk since she drank so much booze, which I admit went a bit too far, as I got some stares, and my sister-in-law demanded to know if I was calling her a bad mom. I said the evidence speaks for itself, and if she wanted to be able to afford to move out of my parents' house someday, then she needs to put her college degree to some use, get a job, and learn to save money. My mother already does most of the childcare for my brother's kids anyway, so she'd have plenty of time after her baby gets a little older. My brother's eldest kid, who's 7 years old, ran up to start kicking me and screaming at me for yelling at his mom, and he kept at me about how his mom said that I was the bad guy who made her cry and didn't let them live here. That's when my brother grabbed his son to pull him away, but all the other relatives jumped back in, and this sort of turned into a family intervention against my sister-in-law and brother. She was crying, her new baby was crying, her kids were crying. Hell, even Dan was very nearly in tears from the verbal lashing he was being assaulted with. He ended up just sitting on the ottoman I keep shoes in by the front door and looking like a complete wreck. He couldn't look anyone in the eye. He couldn't even say 2 words to me, not with a whole house filled with angry people ready to judge him if he tried to let out his inner golden child again. If they weren't there to get in his way, I'd bet this would have ended up a repeat of when he tried to order me around to try and take my house months earlier. By this point, though, he'd been so thoroughly humiliated that his and my parents' reputation in the family was completely destroyed because the masks were all now off. Soon after, my parents, brother, and sister-in-law all left in defeat. The party resumed, and we all avoided speaking of what just happened for the rest of the evening since most of the adults had been drinking. Everyone stayed the night in my house. I even let some of them sleep in the camper so there'd be enough space. I admit it also makes a good guest house. My relatives all wanted a tour of it earlier as well, and they said they couldn't believe I'd been living in it for around 2 years. I got a lot of questions about it, like what summer and winter was like and so on. I was up earlier than everyone else on Christmas morning and had a fresh pot of coffee and some ibuprofen for those spiked eggnog hangovers a few of them had. I was complimented on being a way nicer host than my parents ever were, and we all agreed to do this again next Christmas. After Christmas, my sister-in-law finally stopped making posts that were obvious digs at me and deleted all of the old ones as well. But shortly after the new year, she more recently made a new post complaining about how she tried to convince my parents to get a camper like I did, so it could be set up in the backyard, so Dan and his family could use the whole house as their family home. While a taste of one's own medicine is never fun because my parents turned that idea down vehemently. I hear no one is going to push them out of their own home, let alone their master bedroom. The post was only up for a couple of days before my sister-in-law removed it, and she has hardly posted anything since then. She loves to complain, but if a tree falls and no one is around to hear it, can it still complain? My sister-in-law, I guess, has realized there's no point in doing it when no one hears her anymore, and Dan can't afford to move his family out on his salary alone anytime soon. If they end up expecting another child in the next few years, I won't be surprised. Things mellowed down for me since then, and I've even invited friends over for a poker night. I suck at poker because I can never remember a damn thing about it, but so what? We get to drink beer and eat junk food while being merry idiots. We all loaded up on Whoppers from Burger King and just had the best time grown men can when they just want to have a good, unadulterated time and get pissed drunk. I think maybe around summer I'll look into possibly dating someone. I'm not exactly getting younger here. Fingers crossed that goes well. My camper just sits idle in my yard now, and I admit there were some days I went out there just to spend time in it. I did live in it for 2 years. It's like my second home, and maybe one day I'll actually get to use it for camping like it was meant to be. I've never been camping. My parents considered it a waste of time, so it'd be a completely new experience for me. This pretty much marks the end of what happened. My parents, brother, and sister-in-law have all been staying very clear of me. In fact, they seem to have gone back to acting like I don't exist like they did before I bought a house. Not like that bothers me at all. It's better that way. But they'll inevitably come back in some way, I know they will. I just wonder what kind of stupid thing they'll do next. If anything notable like all this ever happens again, I'll make another post if this account is still active. Now on to the next story. Story 2. My cousin falsely accused me of SA. Now my family is finally contacting me after almost 10 years. I grew up in what was probably the most normal of normal households. My parents worked a lot but still managed to care for me and my 3 older sisters. We were never super close as a family but never had any issues either. The same goes for my extended family. They always lived a few hours away, but we saw each other during summer holidays or Christmas and always got along great. But when we got older, we naturally grew apart as everyone had their own lives. I'm 31 now. In 2014, when I was 22 and attending uni, I got a phone call from my mother that turned my life upside down. I remember I didn't even answer at first because I was gaming with friends, but she called again immediately after the first call. This was an unwritten rule in the family. If you call twice like that, it's important, like someone died important. So when she called again, I excused myself and answered, only to hear chaos at the other end, like people were arguing. But when my mom realized I had answered, it sounded like she went to another room and closed the door. I just asked what was going on, and I heard she was crying. My memory of this conversation is a bit blurry, but she basically asked me if I had something to confess to regarding E. E is my cousin on my mom's side and is 7 years younger than me, 15 at the time. At that point, I hadn't even seen Eve for several years. I just said no and asked what this is about. She just cried even harder and started accusing me of saying E back when we were children, that E had told everything to my sister, and that my sister told my mother and my aunt. E had told them that back when she was 9 and I was 16. She'd been playing in my room when I came in and started feeling her under her clothes and kissing her. My mother screamed at me to say something, but I couldn't even speak. It was all so absurd. I remember thinking that must be some bad joke. The last thing I remember saying was that it was not true and that he was lying. But then my mom went on saying how he gave such a detailed description of where and how, and then she kept asking something like, "Did you do this? Did you do this?" And I just screamed back at her no each time. It all ended with my mom putting me on speaker and both my mom and dad saying that they didn't want anything to do with me and never to contact them again. 2 of my sisters texted me later that day pretty much saying that I'm disgusting and then blocked me. I know it's weird, but after that call I went to have a long shower. To this day, I still don't know why I did that. After calming down, I started calling and texting everyone, even E. No one answered, and the ones who hadn't blocked my number by then quickly did so. The only thing I heard back was from my father, who texted me to stop contacting them and that they needed to heal. That was 9 years ago, and I haven't spoken to anyone in my family since that day. To say this fucked me up is an understatement. I was living in a haze for weeks after that and hardly ate. It didn't help that this was right before I was supposed to defend my bachelor's thesis and was already stressed out. Luckily, my co-writer said something was up and saved me by controlling the conversation so that I got the easy parts. Without him, I am sure I would have failed. Needless to say, no one came to my graduation. Then started the worst period of my life. I spent the first year expecting the cops to knock on my door and arrest me for sexual abuse. I didn't land any jobs, just living off my saved money. I drank a lot and did oxy. I also grew resentful and violent. The only reason I didn't hurt anyone was because no one was around. My neighbor called the cops on me once after I had smashed a glass, but I managed to convince the officers that I had just dropped it, and they went away since there were no others inside my apartment. Instead of sleeping, I spent my nights planning how I could hurt E and make sure no one ever found out, even thinking how I could actually do the things she'd accused me of but much worse. I know I'm not proud of that. I landed my first real job in my field in late 2015. Only then did things start to improve. I focused all my time on my job as it gave me something normal to do. Recovery was a slow process, but I drank less and smiled more. I lived cheaply and earned good money, so I made a point of buying myself a nice gift for my birthdays, a VR headset, a motorcycle, Lego, etc. And last year, I moved from my shitty apartment and bought a small house. It was an old dream of mine to have my own garage and a garden to care for. This has boosted me even more, so my life is okay now. I still have problems. I've been on antidepressants for the last few years, and while they help, it's not in a happy way. They simply removed the dark thoughts and replaced them with dead ones. My trust in other people is close to non-existent. I've tried dating but have only been on 2 dates with 2 different women. It's really hard to speak like a normal person when it comes down to it, and what would I tell a potential partner when she asked about my family? Oh, they accused me of a heinous crime and we're not talking anymore. But I didn't do it, I swear. My field is very male-dominated, so the only woman I really speak to is my therapist, who I like a lot. A few days ago, I received a text from my mother. It felt unreal and I was scared to open it at first, so I just stared at the notification for hours before opening it. Yesterday, a second text followed. Translated, they basically say, "Hi, my name. It's been so long since we talked. We miss you and want to know how you're doing." She writes a long text about my sisters and how my nieces and nephews are getting big. I didn't even know I was an uncle. Know that we love you and always will. Love, Mom and Dad. The second text said, "Hi, my name. We understand if you don't want to talk to us after what happened, but please listen. Last month, the subject of you was brought up at a family gathering. During this, E was downplaying everything that had happened to her. It got so awkward that she finally admitted that nothing happened and that she probably just dreamed it. We were all appalled by this. When we last spoke, we wanted to protect E and did the only thing we thought we could do. We know that's not excusing how you were treated. What we did was wrong, and we're all angry at her. We have called everyone that knew and told them the truth. We all want to speak with you, and your sisters want you to meet their families. Please write back if you can find it in you to forgive us. Love, Mom and Dad." So yeah, that's my situation right now. I haven't answered, but they no doubt know I've seen it. Truth be told, I'm seething. So many old shitty memories are now stirring again. I don't want to forgive them, and I wouldn't trust myself to be in the same room as them right now. Part of me wants to call my family and unleash everything on them, to guilt them with everything I went through until they all hit rock bottom, and then dedicate my life to making my cousin's life as miserable as possible. The other part wants to ignore them and continue with my okayish life with my motorcycle and my garden to keep me company. I don't have any friends. The only people I speak to are my coworkers, but we're not really close. I've called my therapist's clinic, but they told me she's on vacation and won't be available for weeks. I don't want anyone else than her, so that leaves internet strangers. So please, where to go from here? Do I ignore them and continue as is, or do I answer, and if so, what to even write? I'm pretty sure meeting them in person would be a bad idea for the foreseeable future, but I'm not even sure how my life can improve from picking up those old threats. As embarrassing as it may sound, I've dreamed about the day when they apologized to me, then threw themselves to the ground and kissed my feet. Texting seems so anticlimactic now. So it's been around 3 months since I last posted the previous post, and a decent amount has happened. Some for the better and some for the worse. For one, E is still a huge a-hole. Around a week after my family sent me the messages, she also reached out with a huge apology text. When I received it, I couldn't believe my eyes. She was talking about how she had mental problems and had been dealing with them for ages, almost as an excuse as to why she did this to me. She said she needed help and her parents were helping her get it. This seemed like BS to me because all my life I knew E. She was a beaming, radiant girl until that dreadful day in 2014. The whole text felt like she was just feeding the excuses as to why it happened and then ending it off with the shortest actual apology. My original plan was to go on with my life and try to slowly make it better and better, but seeing this pushed me to my limit. I had to respond and tear into her with the most foul words I could think of. In the end, the actual text I ended up sending said, "You think your mental problems are bad? Try being torn away and excommunicated from your whole family for 10 years when you were just in the infant years of your adult life and see how bad those mental problems become. I am still trying to deal with all of this, and the last thing I need is the culprit of my misery feeding me excuses as to why it happened. My other relatives may have been in the dark the whole time, but you knew the entire time, and it never dawned on you to say things sooner. You're lucky I did not offend myself at this point. My parents and siblings might be another story, but I will never be able to forgive you for the irreversible damage you have done to me and my relationships. Please rot in hell and never contact me again. She hasn't responded, but I can see that she got the message because of red receipts. Maybe she took the hint to not respond. The good news is that I also responded to my parents. Nothing crazy in the text because we really got the whole conversation out over the phone. Felt weird hearing their voices again. I used to relate those voices to being safe at home, but after what happened, it was a whole new feeling. First, I hated it. All the sour memories popped back into my brain from the day I last spoke to them. Those voices had been screaming at me for things I didn't even do. The conversation lasted about 3 to 4 hours, and while it was hard for me and most likely them, it was the most productive conversation I've ever had with them. I thought it would be a lot of excuses just like but to my surprise, they not only apologized a million times over but told me everything they were in the wrong about. They said it was weighing on them all these years, and now that the truth is out, they don't know how they can live with themselves. The one really hard part was when I asked them why they didn't hear me out or believe their own son compared to a niece. They told me they struggled with it immensely, but had made it so believable that they felt they had no choice. I told them that instead of just cutting contact, they should have at least tried to get me help, but they gave me nothing to work with. They said they knew this, and that was the hardest part. After the first year or two, they said they wanted to contact me and try to figure things out, but they ultimately decided that me being who I was would not talk to them and things would just get worse. That got me heated a little bit, because who cares what type of person I am? What I really am is your son, and that comes first. In the end, we came to the conclusion that we would stay in contact. I am not going over to visit them or anything, but it's a start. While there is still so much hatred in my heart for them, I feel like things can get better, and that's why I'm somewhat happy. Since that phone call, we frequently check up on each other, and conversations are slowly getting back to what they used to be. Maybe I'll visit them someday, but I don't know when it will be or how it will go. How am I supposed to hug and say hi to the people who threw me out of their lives? Hey guys, so I have another update on my whole situation regarding and the SA accusation. It has been another 4 to 5 months since the last update, and I have some better news than worse this time again. To start off, a lot of people were telling me to sue or take to court. While I agree that what she did was unforgivable and heinous, I don't feel like that will cause any good. The situation has been 10 years in the making, and I kind of just want to be all over and done with it. Taking her to court would cost me thousands of legal fees that I just can't afford, and I also can't help but think of the fact that he never took it to court either. I know that's not a good excuse, but it's just a thought. I am still in contact with my parents, and you won't believe it, but I actually visited them around a week ago. They also have removed contact with and I feel like she's getting the same treatment I went through, similar to being sued in terms of punishment. Believe me, I would know. Visiting the parents went well. I haven't seen the rest of my family as I want the process to be gradual, but we met and had a nice dinner. Of course, in my last post, I said I didn't know how the greeting process would go. How was I supposed to greet the people who tore my normal life away? Well, the greeting went better than I imagined. I thought hate would win over me, but I actually felt somewhat relieved when I saw them. Is that weird? Maybe it was the fact that seeing them, maybe my life was getting back to the normal it was before, but I don't know. I didn't hug them until after, because the conversation we had was pretty grueling. I didn't mean to rip into them, but I felt I had to really get the point across of how much hurt they had caused me. At some point, my mother cried because of the detail I went into about my darkest times. They said they knew they couldn't do anything to fix what had happened, but wanted the future to be optimistic. They even opened the idea of coming home for Christmas and seeing the rest of the family, but I told them my plan about taking it slow and said it might be open to the idea. While I am still conflicted, that feeling of hatred is slowly going away, and I'm overall just feeling like a better person in general. I think the weight of the situation had pulled me down all those 10 years, and now that I am free of judgment, it feels good. I have also started dating now. I met a great girl that I am starting to slowly get serious with. Life is getting better. Who knows what will happen in the next 10 years after this, but for the first time in ages, I feel like things are going up. For all those reading, please use my story as an example of your personal problems and grudges. Things do get better even if you have to wait 10 years. Now on to the next story. Story 3. Last year, my ex-wife had an affair and decided to leave me. Oddly enough, I felt a sense of relief when it happened. From the outside, our marriage might have looked good, but on the inside, it was completely empty. For years, I felt broken down due to the mental and financial strain she put on me. She had a habit of taking large sums of money from my account, leaving me struggling to pay our bills. Whenever I confronted her about it, she turned it around on me, blaming me for not earning enough money. No matter what I did, it was never good enough for her. Everything I did seemed to annoy her or make her angry. I would try to plan dates for us or organize family activities in hopes of spending quality time together. But she was never interested. She would complain or get upset, preferring to stay in bed and sleep instead. Eventually, I stopped trying to include her in anything, which of course led to more complaints from her. She accused me of keeping the children away from her, even though she showed no interest in participating in the first place. After some time, she began spending nights away from home. Initially, she would say she was staying at a friend's house, someone I hardly knew, but when I asked questions, she became irritated and told me it was none of my business where she was. When my ex-wife decided she wanted a divorce, I found myself in a mix of emotions. On one hand, I was really worried about what my life would look like after the divorce. On the other hand, I couldn't help but feel relieved that there was an end in sight to our unhappy marriage. I made it a point to carefully read all the documents her lawyer sent over. It turned out her lawyer wasn't very careful, making a lot of mistakes in the paperwork. These ended up delaying our divorce hearing by several months. Every time I spotted a mistake, I would send the documents back without signing them. Then his office would have to correct and resend them, but often they would make new mistakes or repeat the old ones. There were some pretty big mistakes in the paperwork too. They misspelled my name and her name, got both our birth dates wrong, and even messed up our child's name and birth date. They listed children that weren't ours, got our marriage date wrong, and even had our home address incorrect. They included properties we didn't own, pets we didn't have, and businesses that weren't ours, even suggesting a settlement involving $500,000 for businesses we didn't own. One of the drafts even had her lawyer's own name spelled incorrectly, which I found so funny I laughed about it while I was in the bathroom. It took about 7 drafts before they managed to fix most of these mistakes, but even the final draft that was submitted to the court still had major errors in it. This whole process was frustrating, but also a bit amusing because of the sheer number of mistakes and how basic they were. It made a difficult situation a little more bearable, knowing that at least these mix-ups were slowing things down and giving me time to prepare for what was next. During our divorce proceedings, my ex-wife's lawyer tried to make a case in front of the judge that I should cover all the court and legal fees. However, I was able to make a strong argument against this. I pointed out that many of the delays in the process were due to mistakes on their end, not mine. There were so many errors in the paperwork they sent me that it took longer to get everything sorted out. Because of this, the judge didn't make me pay those fees. After we got divorced, my ex-wife moved in with the man she left me for. Turns out he's not a good guy at all and has been abusive. Once I changed all my banking passwords, she suddenly lost access to my money. She quickly realized just how much she relied on my income to support her lifestyle, which was a bit of a shock to her. To make matters worse, she had been managing the payments for the house we were living in, which actually belonged to her uncle. Because she wasn't making the payments, the house almost got taken away by the bank. Her uncle came to me, desperate for help. He told me that if I wanted to stay in the house, I'd need to cover the back payments she missed, which added up to about $15,000 for 6 months of unpaid mortgage. I didn't have that kind of money just lying around, so I suggested buying the house from him instead. To my surprise, he agreed, and now I own the house that used to belong to my ex-wife's grandmother. It's been a year since the divorce was finalized. I've received a promotion at work which came with a nice pay increase. I'm still living in the same house, working on making improvements whenever I can afford to. I haven't found a new girlfriend, but through online dating, I've been meeting new people and enjoying my single life. Looking back, it's almost funny how my ex-wife left a stable situation for someone who turned out to be far from what she expected, and her actions nearly caused her uncle to lose his property. In a way, her decision to divorce me ended up being a huge favor to me, even if it didn't seem like it at the time. She might try to come back to you when she realizes the grass isn't greener on the other side. But remember, don't let her tears sway you, and make sure you never take her back. Now for my update. November 3rd is coming up, marking 1 year since my divorce was finalized. In this past year, I've taken significant steps to improve myself. I started seeing a therapist who encouraged me to focus on personal growth, and that's exactly what I've been doing. I've changed my diet and exercise routine, which led me to lose over 50 pounds. Soccer has always been a passion of mine, so I got back into playing regularly and even started coaching my kids' youth soccer team. On top of that, I rediscovered my love for reading, setting a goal to read a new book every week. My efforts have paid off at work too. I received a big raise and a promotion, which has made it much easier for me to take care of myself and my child. Despite all these positive changes, my ex-wife suddenly wants to be part of our lives again. Her latest relationship with a man she thought was her savior from our terrible marriage has turned violent. He's been abusive, and one recent episode was so severe it landed her in the hospital. Our child was with her at the time and had to call for an ambulance. Despite the evidence, my ex-wife refuses to press charges or admit what happened, though the bruises clearly tell the story. Just last night, I attended a family party. This side of the family and I have always gotten along well, and they invited me over. I was polite to my ex-wife but kept my distance, choosing not to engage in conversation with her. However, her family seems to have convinced her that we're still in love, which couldn't be further from the truth. My ex-wife might have been okay with how things were in our marriage, but I certainly wasn't happy at all. I became so withdrawn and unresponsive, almost like I was just there as another source of money for her. In the last 2 years we were together, she emotionally and financially took advantage of me. During our final year as a married couple, she was cheating on me with another guy. Every time I tried to talk to her about her affair, she denied everything and would run off to his place. When I finally caught her red-handed, she blamed me, saying it was because I wasn't supportive enough. But the truth was, I was giving her all my earnings after paying our bills. I hadn't even bought myself new clothes or shoes for years because of how tight money was. Then, out of the blue, she turned up at one of the soccer games. After the game, she asked me if I was ready to move back in with her. I was totally taken aback and asked her why on earth I would do something like that. She launched into this whole story about how we're still in love, how we have a kid together, and how it would be better for our children if we raised them together. I had to tell her straight that I didn't have any love or trust left for her at all. I even reminded her that she still owes me over $1,100 for fixing her car. Her response? She said she'd pay me back if we moved in together. That's when I couldn't hold back and just burst out laughing so hard that I doubled over. Seeing me laugh, she started crying, which honestly just made me laugh even harder. Maybe it wasn't the kindest reaction, but after everything I've been through and all the effort I've put into bettering myself, the idea of going back to her, to the very person who caused me so much pain, just seemed like the worst possible decision. My child still holds a lot of affection for his mother, and I would never do anything to damage their relationship. I believe if there's any turning away to be done, she'll manage that on her own with her actions. The idea that she suggested we move back in together took me by surprise. She didn't offer any apologies or show any signs of regret for her past actions. Instead, she just boldly proposed we start living together again, acting as if she's bringing something valuable to the table. This kind of thinking on her part is pretty out there. And then there's our child, who had to go through the distressing experience of seeing his mom in a harmful situation. That's something that could really affect him deeply. I think it's important to try and secure full custody to protect him from being in such a harmful environment again. Moving on to my latest news, I've met someone really special. I understand that healing from all these events will take time for everyone involved, but I'm hopeful that we can all find our own versions of happiness, whatever decisions we make about our relationships. This past year has been a roller coaster for me. I celebrated the first anniversary of my divorce on November 3rd. Since then, I've been focusing on self-improvement through therapy, and I've been dating. I've met some fantastic women and, admittedly, a few that weren't a great match for me. Just this Monday, my ex-wife came across a Facebook post from my girlfriend, Sure. Sure had shared some photos from a wonderful trip we took together over the weekend. We indulged in delicious food, enjoyed a few drinks, and generally had an incredible time, capturing lots of fun moments in photos. I'm not usually one to document my dates with pictures, but I really like Sure, so when she asked if she could post our trip pictures and tag me, I was happy to agree. I was pretty sure sharing those photos would stir up some drama, but the reaction I received from my ex-wife and her family was astonishingly intense. Let me give you a bit more background to paint the whole picture. My ex-wife was unfaithful for over a year before we officially ended our marriage. She was seeing someone else even before we separated and moved in with her boyfriend while our divorce was still being processed. Now we've been divorced for a year. Throughout our marriage, my ex-wife was both emotionally and financially manipulative and harmful towards me. Unfortunately, she continues to be abusive, but after I posted those photos, she dropped to an entirely new level of hostility and disrespect towards me. On Monday, she twisted the story to make it look like I was the one who had been unfaithful. She complained about how shameful it was for me to humiliate her by sharing pictures on social media where I was seen with other women. She accused me of being selfish and insensitive for not considering her feelings and labeled me a coward for hiding that I was seeing other people. She even claimed that by my actions, I've destroyed any hope of us ever getting back together, saying that any love she still had for me was killed off by what she called my cheating ways. The whole time she was making these accusations, she was on the phone shouting and berating me. Meanwhile, I couldn't help but find the irony of her claims hilarious. I just laughed as she spent a good 30 minutes ranting about how I supposedly ruined our relationship and betrayed her, despite her being the one who cheated and was abusive throughout our relationship. When my ex-wife asked me about my fidelity during our marriage, I was clear with her. I'd been completely faithful and loyal until our relationship officially ended. She didn't stop there, though. She went on to question me about my dating life since our divorce. That made me laugh even more, and I firmly told her that my personal life was no longer her concern since we were not together anymore. Moreover, I pointed out to her that just as I don't meddle in her affairs, she has no right to intrude into mine. Despite my attempt to set this boundary, she bombarded me with a series of really hurtful and offensive text messages, attacking me and my current girlfriend, Sure. She even threatened to send Sure direct messages to tell her all sorts of negative things about being married to me. I told her she was welcome to try if she thought it would make any difference. Then my ex-wife mentioned wanting to meet Sure in person to see what kind of woman she is, suggesting that Sure must be a terrible person for supposedly breaking up a happy marriage. That's when I really had to question her grasp on reality. I reminded her bluntly that our marriage had ended over a year ago, and it was she who had an affair, left me for someone else, and filed for divorce. At this point, my ex-wife broke down crying. Through her tears, she confessed that she had been holding on to hope that we might somehow reconcile. She complained that it was unfair I had moved on and found someone else to spend time with, insisting that I should be focusing on doing things with her and our child as if we were still a family. This whole conversation highlighted just how disconnected from reality my ex-wife had become, seemingly unable to accept the consequences of her own actions that led to the end of our marriage. My ex-wife recently confessed to me that she's unhappy in her current relationship with her boyfriend, mentioning that he doesn't treat her well. Honestly, I wasn't surprised by this revelation because I had suspected as much for a while. However, hearing about her problems doesn't bring me any satisfaction. In fact, I really don't have any feelings for her anymore, and I have no desire to get back together with her. I'd prefer it if we didn't have to interact at all. But on a brighter note, my life is going really well right now. I found happiness with my girlfriend, Sure. She brings so much joy into my life, and I always look forward to spending time with her. She's the last person I talk to before I go to sleep and the first one I reach out to when I wake up. We're even planning another trip together soon. I'm aware that sharing photos of our trip might trigger a negative reaction from my ex-wife. But to me, living my life happily is worth any backlash. It's clear to me now that my ex-wife has always tried to make me out to be the bad guy, which is classic narcissistic behavior. To those giving me advice, you're right. I should keep our interactions strictly about our child and avoid getting dragged into long, pointless conversations with her. And yes, I'm prepared for the possibility that she might try to spread lies about me, but I'm focusing on moving forward positively. Now for a bit of a reflection. 2 years on the day everything changed for me was March 21st, 2022. That late night in 2021, I discovered not just one affair but evidence of another, and possibly more. After 23 years of marriage, 2 biological children, and a stepchild, I spent a year trying to mend our relationship, but her ongoing issues with mental health, PTSD, substance abuse, and secretive behavior, like finding a second phone she was using, made it impossible to continue trying to reconcile. The final straw in my marriage came when she fired a gun into my side of the bed. That terrifying moment made me decide to end things once and for all. I filed for divorce in April, and by June it was all over. The relief I felt was enormous. It was like I had been given a second chance at life. Up until that point, I hadn't fully grasped just how much stress and fear I had been living with. Looking back, I can see all the mistakes I made after discovering her betrayal. I reacted all wrong. Instead of taking time to process everything, I rushed into trying to fix our relationship without addressing the underlying issues. We didn't seek therapy immediately, which was a huge oversight. By the time we did start therapy, it was already too late to make any difference. Our children had already lost all respect for their mother, and I was left feeling a mix of devastation, humiliation, anger, and grief. I was barely getting through the days, feeling like a zombie. In April of last year, I was overwhelmed by the number of people who reached out to offer their support after my ex-wife launched a smear campaign against me on social media. She accused me of everything under the sun, from abuse and rape to stealing a significant amount of money. Of course, she conveniently left out her own actions. I responded by posting a short public service announcement to clear my name, stating that none of the accusations were true. I understood if some people felt they needed to distance themselves from me, but I also hoped others would be willing to give me the chance to prove my innocence. Meanwhile, I focused on improving myself. I got in shape, dropping from 250 pounds to 185 pounds. I also made a significant career move, taking on a new role that came with a promotion. I had plans to enjoy a summer of revenge by casually dating through phone apps. During this time, an old high school classmate reached out to me. She lived far away and was going through a similar breakup, having discovered her partner's betrayal about 6 months after mine. We started checking in with each other regularly, offering support and understanding. When I had to travel to Knoxville for work, we found ourselves texting one night, catching up, and sharing our experiences. I had been looking forward to experiencing some live music during my stay, talking up how exciting the 2 nights ahead of me were going to be. But contrary to what I initially thought, my summer didn't turn out to be filled with a series of casual flings, as I had playfully imagined. Instead, what unfolded was a summer filled with beach outings, live music, tours of distilleries, since she really enjoys whiskey, and simply having a great time, the likes of which I hadn't experienced in years. As summer transitioned into fall, our relationship deepened. We got to meet each other's families, spent Thanksgiving with her family, celebrated Christmas together, and even took a trip to Las Vegas to enjoy a long weekend over the Super Bowl. All these experiences brought us closer. Now, as I celebrate my 52nd birthday, I find myself genuinely happy. The last couple of birthdays were pretty rough, but this one feels special and exciting because she's on her way to moving in with me. She's a nurse and managed to quickly find a job in my city here in the South. She's decided to keep her own house and let her daughter rent it out. If a friend were in my situation, I might have cautioned them that it's too much too soon. But for us, it just feels like the right move. We're not rushing into marriage or anything like that. We're just 2 people who are tired of trying to match our schedules and missing out on time together. We're moving in together to see if our relationship is as strong as we believe it to be. On this forum, a lot of people talk about karma or getting revenge on their exes. In my case, my ex still sends me drunk texts often, saying she wishes we were still together. It's a mix of apologies and blaming me for our breakup. Half the time she's sorry, and the other half she still thinks everything was my fault. But the truth is, I'm much happier now without her. I'm less stressed, and I've met someone incredible. She's amazing, way more than I ever expected to be with her, and she's really into me, even though I sometimes worry it's too good to be true. So in a way, I feel like I've already gotten the best kind of revenge by just living my life well. My message to you all is that even though what happened to you because of your spouse or partner was devastating, it's possible to move past it and find happiness again. Sometimes they don't realize the good thing they had until it's gone. But once you're on the other side, you might see that you're actually better off. I shared my story to inspire you not to give up, no matter how tough things get. It's never too late to make a fresh start. Remember to put yourself first and have faith in your ability to recover and thrive. Things really can improve. I managed to start anew at 50, proving it's possible at any age. If you like this video, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and give us your thought about the stories in the comments section. Thank you and see you in the next video.